Because what I'm about to tell you is that busy is the most dangerous four-letter word in the English language.
Yeah.
In part because if you and I are meeting, or we're down on the show floor, we're chatting,
Yeah.
and I haven't seen you in a while. I say, "How you doing?" You say you're busy. The first thing you say, "Oh yeah, me too." And we both give ourselves a pass, and neither one of us talked about what we're actually getting done.
Personality tests are one of those things I have a love-hate relationship for. They can be extremely useful, but if used the wrong way, I think they can lead you to some really weird conclusions. My guest today, Kevin Eikenberry, feels the same way about a lot of different tests, specifically leadership tests and leadership styles. Kevin is an author, a podcast host, a speaker, and an expert in all things leadership. And we sit down today to talk about, some of the more granular, nuanced discussion that can get missed if you focus just on big picture leadership styles. This is a great discussion where we talk about the actionable steps that leaders can take to improve themselves and the people around them. As Kevin says, too few leaders take the time to really block out on their calendar when they're going to be improving themselves as a manager. It is the single most important thing you can do to improve your team. And if you're not blocking time on your calendar to do it, it probably isn't happening. Before we get into the discussion, I do want to remind you that if this is your first time listening to the show, please make sure you subscribe so you never miss a future episode. And if you happen to be someone who's responsible for developing leaders in your organization, I would love to talk to you. Reach out to me at matt@bettereverydaystudios.com so that we can see the challenges that you're trying to face with your leaders and figure out how to make your organization's managers better. With that, let's get into the discussion with Kevin Eikenberry. Kevin, welcome to the Leadership Launchpad. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, especially here.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that they can't see the beautiful thing that I can look at.
Yeah.
I mean, I can look at you, but I can also look out this window and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
In Washington, D.C.
Yeah, it's fantastic. This is probably the best time of year. I mean, the weather is just fantastic here.
It's true.
It's pretty
But I'll try to stay focused here.
Okay, yeah.
I won't look there and I won't look out there.
It's not too distracting. Okay, excellent. I would love to start because I know one of the things you're talking about here at HED is leadership styles. I've presented on leadership styles before. There's lots of books out there on leadership styles. What's your problem with leadership styles and why don't they work in the modern world?
Well, so let's just start here. You and I are standing on the shoulders of people that have been trying to help leaders get better for a long time.
Yes.
And you, I'm sure, as am I know that I know many of those people. I can call some of those people my friends. And I know that all those people, many of whom have developed leadership style models, have tremendously good intentions.
Yes.
Here's the problem. The problem isn't necessarily with the model.
Okay.
The problem is with how all of us apply or use that information.
I love it.
So here's the deal. So we try to build a model of anything. It doesn't matter whether it's a leadership style model or whether it's DISC or Myers-Briggs, or any model of anything is designed to take something that's really complex and make it simpler.
Yep.
So we can get our arms around it. Like, I actually own a collection. I grew up on a farm.
Yeah.
I own a collection of antique tractors. I own full-size antique tractors.
Yeah.
I also own toys.
Okay.
And the toys are a model of the more complex real thing.
Yeah.
The DISC model, Myers-Briggs model, a strengths model, any kind of leadership style model is designed to simplify the complexity of human behavior and leadership work.
Yep.
So that we can get our arms around it. And we should consider that to help us understand our initial tendencies.
Yeah.
Leadership style is about tendencies. Leadership style is not about absolutes.
Yes.
Leadership styles are not about our identity.
Yeah.
Here's where they become a problem. They become a problem when we take complex to simpler.
Yeah.
And then we pull the nuance out of it and say, well, I'm an ESTJ, or I'm a blue, or I'm a crocodile, or I'm a facilitative leader. It doesn't matter. And I'm not picking on anybody's model. The purpose of the models are solid. The value in the work that was done to create the models is solid. The problem is We then, as humans, we take this simpler thing, take the nuance out of it, and now it's our identity. And I say, well, these are my strengths. This is who I am. Identity makes it extraordinarily hard, Ben,
Yeah.
for us to flex,
Yeah.
for us to adapt, for us to change, for us to do anything other than say, in the back of my head, well, this is how I lead.
Yeah.
And if it's my identity, see, there's a difference between something being my identity and being my tendency.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
I like it. Yeah. And I mean, the phrase that comes to mind is the map is not the territory.
100%.
And with a mistake that we make, it's like the map is great with great intention and it's a close approximation, but you should never follow Google Maps off a dead end road just because it's saying to.
So, well, we could have a whole conversation about a real map and then a Google map too.
Yeah,
because there's another thing worth thinking about there that is super important. And that is, I have a love-hate relationship with Google Maps.
Okay.
Like when you're in your car and you're using it and it says, like if I'm in Washington, D.C. today and I don't know my way around and it says at the next light, turn right, or in 350 feet, do this, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
But too many people are only seeing a map in terms of here's the next step I take versus, well, where am I where am I? I'm in Washington, D.C., but where does Washington, D.C. fit? And like, where's the water and where's this? So what we as leaders must do is look at a higher level.
Yeah.
So like I grew up with a road atlas. And if I look at a road atlas, I get a different view than if I look at what Google Maps is telling me to do in the next 12 seconds.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying there's never a time to know in 350 feet turn left. I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is if that's all we do, we don't have context. Too many leaders are leading like that. They're just they're living and leading at what's right in front of them. What I would call a worm's eye view. I see this tree. If I'm a worm, that's all I see. That is different than if have a bird's eye view.
Yeah, and because that really is, again, in that to simplify things, to narrow them down, that's what it promotes is very often you end up with very actionable checklists of saying, because X, I do Y, and you don't necessarily get deep enough to understand why somebody wrote that.
Exactly, and I'm not saying we don't need those things. I'm saying that they're ultimately not enough.
Yes.
And so if you're, and I know that, we're talking to a lot of folks who are brand new leaders who haven't been doing it very long.
Yes.
Like you need some of that so you can survive.
Yes.
But you can't stay there.
Got it.
If you live there, you'll never become as effective as you want to be.
Yeah.
And as your team needs you to be.
So then how do people start zooming out a little bit then? What are some of the first steps that you can take to get more of that context so you're not always looking at that worm's eye view?
Well, the first thing is recognizing there's a difference, right? So that's the first thing. And the second thing is then I've got to find time. I've got to make time to get out of the daily work. I've got to take time to think about what's going on with my team.
Yeah.
To step back
Yeah.
mentally and emotionally. Because if you are living in your task list, even as a leader, like, listen, you got to become a leader. Many people got to be leaders because they were good at the task list.
100%.
Right?
100%.
And because they're good at that, well, we're going to,
Yeah.
you're a great engineer. We're going to make you a leader.
Yep.
You're a great whatever. And we're going to make you a leader. And you were excellent at being on projects and getting things done. Now we're going to make you the leader of the project team.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Except, if you just stay in that task mode,
Yeah.
and you're never looking up and you're never looking out, your team needs you to have a perspective that they don't have.
Yeah.
And if you don't take the time to create it, you can't get it to them.
Yeah. I've got the opportunity to work at a lot of extremely high performing companies. And I have a friend of mine who's worked at even more of them. He's kind of bounced around. He's always been like the first HR person at a number of these startups that have grown really quickly and been really successful. And I was having a conversation with him the other day, and I just said, given the things that you've seen, what makes it different? Like why are these companies that you're working for being so successful? Is it just hard work? Is it they're smarter people? Like what's going on? And he gave me a really, really surprising answer. He said, yes, it's hard work, but not because we're just doing more of the task list. He said, if we're working 12 hours in a day, we're spending 8 hours on the task list, but then it's 5 p.m., it quiets down. Those next 4 hours, are on thinking about the context around, is this the right task? Is tomorrow's priority still the same? Are we still headed in the right direction? He said, like, what they do is all of the, he said, like, down to every employee, because these are still relatively small companies.
Yeah.
They're spending a lot of time every single day thinking about the plan of attack and are we going in the right direction? Do we have the right priorities? Still relatively focused on the task list, but I think what I'm hearing you're saying is it's that, but for how's the team doing? How am I doing as a leader? Where am I going next as a leader?
So two things. One is it's super important to look forward. It's also important for us to look back, because one of the ways for us to get, one of the most powerful ways we can get better is to reflect on what happened.
Okay.
I mean, you know this from your background.
Yeah.
Doing a debrief. If
Yes.
if we will look at what happened and not just say what happened, but now what? What do I do?
Yeah.
What did I learn from that? What do I want to keep doing? What
Yeah.
do I want to stop doing?
Yeah.
What do I want to adjust about how I'm
Yeah.
doing it? And if we stay buried in the list, we never get to that. So we have to look forward. We have to look back, and putting those two things together is what's really powerful.
Yeah.
The other thing, though, to what you were just saying, I wrote about this morning for my newsletter.
Fantastic.
Is this idea of, as a leader, really as a human, but as a leader, we have two perspectives we need to consider, and most of us only consider one of them as a habit.
Okay.
Perspective one is the content, the task, the stuff, the deliverables, the output, the outcomes.
Yeah.
That's one focus. The other focus is the process.
Yeah.
So are we only thinking about what, or are we thinking about how? And as a leader, the what's are probably not changing. Like your values, the principles of human behavior, the principles of group dynamics, the purpose of your organization. That's the content. That's the roots of your tree.
Yeah.
But how we lead it, the approach that we take today versus yesterday, in this meeting versus the last meeting, that's a totally different thing. And so being able to think not just about content, but about process, to not just think about outcome, but think about others, to not just think about what, but think about how.
Okay. And so what are some of the, you talk a lot about behavior, like actionable behaviors. That's what I love. That's what I talk about a lot. What are some of the ways that you've seen people successfully start to do that? Like, are there any, tactics or tips for, I guess I'll say two things. First, you mentioned making time. One, how do people make the time to do that, to make it a habit of thinking about it? And then two, in that limited time, what are some of the best ways? Is it just reflecting on back, doing your own personal debriefs? What are some other tactics?
Well, that's certainly part of it. But let's talk about the time thing for a second, because my grandmother was never alive to hear me say this, and she would disagree with me.
Okay.
Because what I'm about to tell you is that busy is the most dangerous four-letter word in the English language.
Yeah.
In part because if you and I are meeting, or we're down on the show floor, we're chatting, and I haven't seen you in a while, I say, how you doing? You say you're busy. The first thing you say, oh yeah, me too. And we both give ourselves a pass, and neither one of us talked about what we're actually getting done.
Yeah.
There's a big difference between activity and accomplishment. And so as leaders, everything we've been talking about here has been about accomplishment.
Yes.
And which means we have to reframe the work that we're doing.
Yes.
So finding the time to do some of the stuff that you and I have been talking about, it doesn't necessarily have to be 4 hours.
Yeah.
It doesn't even it could be turning off, except for this podcast, turning off the podcast on the drive home and reflecting on the day, thinking about what's going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah.
Turning off the screens, whichever screens they are, for 30 minutes at home, 20 minutes, 15 minutes, any of those things, and using that time more intentionally can help us with a lot of this.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, all of us block time on our calendar, right? So here's the exercise I do with people in workshops. I did it last week.
Yeah.
So how many of you as leaders would block time on your calendar to work on something important? Everyone raises their hand. How many of you, when someone comes up to you and needs to have a meeting with you or needs to do something, do take that time off your calendar to have that meeting? About 90% of the hands go up again.
Mm-hmm.
I said, so imagine that you, and I wouldn't want this to be true for anyone, but imagine that you'd had some heart issues and you're fine, but you have an occasional scheduled meeting or appointment with your cardiologist.
Mm-hmm.
He said, would you put that on your calendar? Yeah. Would you cancel it for the same things you canceled other things for? No. If you're blocking time on your calendar to work on something important, and as leaders, we're not just talking about urgent now, we're talking about
Yes.
important.
Yes.
It's cardiologist time.
Okay.
It's cardiologist time. So that's a short answer about the time thing.
Yeah.
It is the work. It's the most
Yes.
important
Yes.
work.
Yeah.
Whether it's on a project, whether it's this higher level perspective, whether that's spending a little more time with a more senior executive to really understand the context of the situation, or really understand why this change is coming so you can communicate it effectively. Any one of those things, as opposed to just next thing on the list.
I love it when you say it is the work. It sparked Stephen Pressfield's The War of Art in in my mind, because he's talking about it from a creative lens, but he's talking about like being a professional, right?
Yeah.
And really what you're saying is like, no, taking the role of being a manager seriously, of this is now your profession, as something that you and the work is exactly what you're talking about.
You got promoted, not you, well, you did too, but we're talking to our audience, right? You got promoted because you were good at that work.
Yes.
If you want to be effective in the new work, it's different work.
Yeah.
And you know as well as I know that many folks, when they first get that promotion, there's all sorts of challenges, and one of them is I need to do the work that I know, and the work that I know is the work I used to do.
Yeah.
And so we don't want to delegate that, and we micromanage that,
Yeah.
or we just don't want to let go of that, and we just keep doing it.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm not saying there's never a time to roll up your sleeves and help.
Yeah.
I'm not saying there's not a time when you don't have to do that. I'm saying that's not your job.
Yeah.
That's a small part of your job.
Yeah.
We think of three circles. So you think the first two, like manager and leader, are two parts of your job.
Okay.
And manager and leader aren't the same. We manage things, we lead people, right? And then the third circle below. So think like the MasterCard logo, and then a third circle below it.
Yeah.
The third, so manager, management, leadership, your work. And that your work circle should slowly be sliding up to be inside of the other two. Even a CEO has a little bit of a crescent moon that's below. It's not really management and leadership.
Yep.
But as you transition at first, you're so used to that bottom circle.
Yeah.
You're so good at that bottom circle. You've been recognized for that bottom circle. It's what got you promoted.
Yeah.
And so psychologically, why do we want to let go of that?
Yeah.
But we have to, because it's not the core of our work anymore.
Yeah, I say this a lot on the podcast, so I apologize, but it feels so relevant. In the Air Force, we always said you're always doing your last job. Group commanders are being squadron commanders. Wing commanders are being group commanders. And it's for exactly that purpose, especially in the military. You get moved around so much that as soon as you learn a job, you move.
Yep.
And so then that initial reaction, instead of trying to figure out this new thing, is to just do what you did before.
Yep.
And
You got to move to the next.
you got to move on. You got to move on.
No, you got to take what you learned from that.
Yeah.
Like, and the beautiful thing is, even if you're moving from individual contributor, engineer, to being a leader of engineers, even if you're doing that, like we're not trying to forget all that stuff.
Yeah.
We just can't put our focus there.
Yeah.
And that's important.
It's a big thing that I think why it's so important for organizations to have multiple pathways to move forward in your career and to be clear with people, because I do think it is important. Like when you become a people manager, by definition, you have to not be as good at whatever specialty you had before. And some people don't want to do that, and that's fine. We need
You want
people
to be that technical expert, then that's where you should stay, and hopefully your organization helps you find a way to do that and still be compensated and all those other things.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I often, a while back, I've said this in many ways before, but I was with a group of folks who had been IT professionals, and now they were managers of IT folks.
Yeah.
And I said, when you got promoted, did what you read change? If you're reading the same blogs, listening to the same podcasts, you're probably making a mistake. If you're still reading about database management, it's probably not. I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't be aware.
Yes.
But you need to be listening to this podcast rather than
I love that.
the podcast about the latest and greatest databases.
Yeah. I love that, because that's a super actionable thing that anybody can just do, is realize what's surrounding your consciousness, what's the media that you're taking in.
What I don't love this language, but what is the content that you're consuming, and is it consistent with the work?
Yeah.
And I would guess, especially early in your transition, it's probably not.
Yeah. Yeah. So, big picture, you talked about how we need to have more awareness. Leadership styles are great for their purpose, but we have to understand that there is a greater context to that.
100%.
The only way to understand that context is to take the time, build some time, do some reflecting. The real work is think about the past, think about where we're going, figuring all that out. As we do that, and managers start to identify more of that context, more of these behaviors of things they need to work on and things they need to improve. In your experience, what are some of the more common things that new managers need to work on in terms of those actionable behaviors that they need to develop?
They need to spend more time getting to know their folks.
Okay.
The first thing I always suggest to new leaders, and it's really not just new leaders, it's anytime you get a new team, have a new team, is to go on what I call a listening tour, which means I'm not making decisions yet. I'm not making changes yet. I'm going to talk to everybody on the team, and I have two goals. Number one is I want you to tell me what's going on. I want to know what things look like from your perspective. I want to know if you got this job, what would you do? What do you want to tell me because I have it? What is going well on the team? What is not going well on the team? Now you're going to get a bunch of stuff, some of which you've already identified and you will agree with. And even if someone says something, well, this is what I would do. Even if you're thinking that's what I'm going to do, don't say it. It's theirs. Take it all in. And while you're doing that, you're starting to build relationships with those people. So that is always the first thing, because many of the mistakes that new leaders make is they go to one end or the other of a spectrum. We call it a flexor. They either make too much change too quick, or they don't want to change anything. And if they'll take the time to do that listening tour, you got 5 people, you'll have it done in a week. I'm coaching a CEO. There's about 100 people in the organization, and then the first 2 months he met with every single person in the organization to do the same thing. So now when you first of all, you got time to really assess and make better decisions, wiser decisions. But you've also started to build a lot of credibility, trust, and relationships with people. So they're not expecting you to do all the stuff that they suggested, but they're going to start to see things that they said or heard you say, implemented, and your trust goes up even more. There's lots of things we could say, but if I could give you one, that'd be the one.
How, just on that one, how important is it? And because I can see this at all kinds of levels, like it works with the CEO, it can be a new leader of a frontline team. One of the things that I think comes up a lot in receiving that kind of feedback is a worry of, well, what if I don't do anything with this? How, you mentioned sometimes you'll just see it. Do you recommend that people have a clear process for letting people know the impact long term?
And I think, so let's say you've got a team of 10 people, right? You're going to be having a team meeting or staff meeting or whatever. You want to mention, here's why I'm going to have these conversations. And everyone's going to know that you finished them. Hey, here are some of the key things I learned or whatever. But we have to always remember this as leaders. Leaders are often so afraid of asking a question that they don't have an answer to. Right? And so always remember that people want our ears more than our answers.
I love that.
And they don't need answers always. What they need is acknowledgement. And almost everyone realizes that reasonable people might not always come to the same conclusion. And so trust your people to be reasonable. And they will reciprocate that. And that's why those listening conversations you shouldn't really say much of anything except ask more questions. Because you just want to hear from them, and you don't have to agree with what they say. It's one of the things leaders have so much trouble with resistance is they're afraid to talk about it because they don't know what they're going to say. All they want is for you to acknowledge how they're feeling.
I think that's, and again, this goes back to that early transition. You're, as an individual contributor, you were rewarded for doing the task list and having answers. Like you were the one who did the stuff. And we have to train ourselves to just stop, just not respond, not immediately say something back or provide an answer.
Here's the thing. If someone comes to you, virtually or otherwise, with a question, and you give them an answer and you're thinking, I'm just being helpful to them, then you have taught them by your example, this is how we play. I have a problem. I have a question. I come to Matt. He gives me an answer. Oh, that's how this works here.
Great.
That's the game. I'm not gaining anything out of that. But if every time I come to you with a question, you say, well, what have you already considered? What would you recommend? What would you do if I was on vacation?
Love it.
What are our options? then it won't take very long for me to come to those
Yeah.
to those having thought those things through.
Yeah.
Now we may not end up doing the things I was thinking, but now we're having a conversation, we're having a dialogue about the situation. You're coaching me in those moments. You're learning from me in those moments.
Yeah.
And collectively you're building the competence and confidence of your team.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's been fantastic, Kevin. Really, thank you for taking the time out to come over here. I think,
pleasure.
you know, there's some really great insights in there. Where, if people love listening to you, where can they find more of you?
Well, I'll give you 3 places. Number 1, you can go to listen to my podcast. If you've got one, you want to add another one, the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, wherever you find your podcasts. If you connect with me on LinkedIn, I'd love for you to do that. And all of our podcast episodes are first live streamed there. So once you're connected with me, you can actually, in most cases, find out about them, watch them live, participate in them if you can.
Excellent.
6-ish weeks before they go on the podcast.
Excellent.
And you can always go to our website, kevineikenberry.com, where you can find all about what we're doing, the projects and products and services we provide, and all those sorts of things.
Perfect. Well, Kevin, thank you so much.
My
It was a
pleasure.
pleasure. Yeah.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to today's show. If you are looking for help turning your organization's great engineers into great managers, me and my team at Better Everyday Studios would love to help. We deliver targeted and interactive training workshops that are designed to help build the 3 fundamental skills of any new manager: building trust, giving feedback, and setting goals. Reach out to me through matt@bettereverydaystudios.com so we can start making your organization better every day.